All right, hello and welcome everyone to a builds refresh for CITRINE. So, she of course has a new augment which we will be talking about, and unfortunately we will be talking about why I do not think that the new augment is worth using and showing her actual new build. So, for that, let's just jump in, as we have a bit to talk about with the new augment and why I think it is not worth using. Of note, before we get into that, let's talk about these shards. First and foremost, I have a 15% parkour velocity shard. This is just a taste. I like to be faster. That's all that it is. I do have a Tau purple shard, which this is the equilibrium effect. It is a smaller version of that. It's like a third of the effect or whatever. But this is like lets you pick up health orbs and turn them into energy, which is very good on CITRINE as she generates a lot of health orbs. And then finally, I have a 15% ability strength Tau shard. This is going to be important later, but I am going to show a build that does not require either of these shards and is not optimized to be equipping these shards. So if you do not have shards, don't worry, there is still a build here for you. For that, we're going to talk about the recrystallize build first, because if you do want to use a recrystallize, this new augment, it is pretty good. I do not think that this is a bad augment. It is honestly quite solid, and I think that it is a reasonable choice, especially if you do not want to put any helmet whatsoever on CITRINE. I just think that it's unfortunate that this does not continue to crowd control enemies as they are spread to. So, for those that don't know how recrystallize works, or how crystallize works in general, just to quickly show, whenever we get these enemies up here, if I use my 4, they will all be crystallized and stopped, right? Obviously, this is how it works. This is the crowd control of crystallize, and then shooting the crystals gives you red crits. That's the basic over-under of how this functions. Recrystallize allows you to kill the enemies that are affected by crystals and spread it to new enemies. I'm going to turn on invincibility for this just to make it simple. But for this, if I take recrystallize and only hit these enemies with it over here, you can see these guys over here don't have it. I can shoot this enemy to spread it to them. You can see these enemies now have like the crystals on this leg and on this arm, but they are not stunned. So while recrystallize is honestly really easy to spread and keep going, and you get that really high crit chance all of the time, because you're not getting the crowd control effect, it's a bit of a hard sell for me. It kind of goes two ways. I know that some people have expressed that they enjoy that the enemies can like still get to you, but for me, a large part of recrystallize's value is that they are completely stopped and you can just pop the crystals and just like move through huge groups of enemies and just completely lock down areas. And especially locking down harder targets like acolytes and stuff is a big advantage of crystallize in general, which it doesn't prevent you from just casting crystallize when an acolyte spawns, but I find it to be underwhelming for what the augment is providing. There was a leaked version of this augment that had an extra effect on it, and I think that that probably would have pushed it to where it would be worth using, but unfortunately the release version doesn't have anything else besides the spread to enemies. It is worth noting you can continue to spread this, and it appears that like each new spread basically has a new timer. So you can basically do like sarin spores with it, except for with a timer you do have to consider a little bit. But that being said, CITRINE generates enough energy that it's really not a problem to continue to cast her 4 if that's what you want to do. That being said, I think this build is fine. I don't have any problems with this build, and if you want to use recrystallize, I think it's good, and you're going to have a good time in the vast majority of content. But what I think is better is a pillage build, especially given the new toys that we have access to, namely Precision Intensify. Precision Intensify does a lot of work to make a pillage build very, very strong on CITRINE, because we can replace our 4 with pillage, and then Precision Intensify works on pillage. With that, it makes it much easier to exactly hit thresholds on what we need for getting a full armor strip without having to cast twice on pillage. And having to cast twice, while not so bad, having like just one cast is much, much more efficient and is very convenient for a much higher level play. So with that, the strength add up here to get to the numbers that we need to get to, because pillage starts at 25%, so you need 400% strength in order to get there. The math add up here is we have Precision Intensify for plus 90, Blind Rage is plus 99, Augur Secrets is plus 24, and then Molt Augmented is plus 60. And we have the minus 60 on Overextended, so Molt Augmented and this basically even out, and you need to get the kills in order to get that strength back. With that, we go from this to this 178, Precision Intensifies plus 90, so that's 268 plus this 60% that you can't see here. That gets us to exactly 328. So the way that the armor strips work here, Corrosive Projection is minus 18% armor on enemies. This minus 18% means that the number on pillage does not need to hit 100%. It only needs to get to 82. And 328 happens to be the magic number of strength that we need to get to in order to get a full strip in one cast of pillage once Molt Augmented is built up. That is why we have the single Tau strength shard on CITRINE, because that 15% is necessary for this math to perfectly work out and line up all beautifully. That being said, it's not necessary to do, and you will lose not a ton by switching off of the shards. The other shard I have is, of course, Equilibrium. That is going to be a huge energy generation as we're hitting enemies with our 1, creating a bunch of health orbs, turning all that health orbs into energy, and it's very, very good. If you do not have any shards at all and you don't want to use shards, budget pillage is this. It's very, very similar. We run the Equilibrium mod because you're going to want that for your energy economy, and then we just swap out Overextended with Augur Reach, and it's no big deal. In fact, because pretend this number is 199 because minus 15 because no shard, of course. From this, you have 199 plus the 90% precision intensify. So with that, you get to 289. And then from 289, it actually only requires a rank 2 Molt Augmented. You don't even need a maxed one in order to get the full strip. So it becomes a much, much cheaper build that is much easier to put together whenever you do that. Also, of course, you still have the option of, like, instead of Augur Reach, you could run Augur Secrets. You'll still need to find a little bit of strength in there somewhere, but I think even a unranked Molt Augmented will get you the rest of the way if you can't get copies of Molt Augmented for some reason, which is fairly easy to acquire, I think. But yeah, otherwise, for survivability stuff and not like, the build around for pillage, what we have in this build is we are going Adaptation for 90% damage reduction, but more realistically, more like 70% damage reduction from being shot. That is pairing very well with Preserving Shell, giving us the 90% DR the vast majority of the time. And then those two things are also paired with Arcane Blessing because we can generate lots of health orbs. This gives us 1,200 health, putting us at 1,700 health, which is very, very good and pairs very well with our health regeneration, of course. And of course, we have Prime Sure-Footed so that we don't get knocked down by anything. Not that CITRINE really has a problem with dying if she does get knocked down. It's just that it's annoying. So if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, you're honestly going to be fine unless you decide that you want to play her as a melee frame, because Prime Sure-Footed does help with that aspect. Besides that, Prime Flow, just so we can hold all the energy that we're generating and cast at will, is great. And then the only other thing that I want to talk about are these two Archon mods. So, Archon Continuity has a very minor, at best, benefit. Your 3 technically will also apply Corrosive whenever it applies Toxin, and that is something. It's not literally nothing, but it usually is literally nothing. But it is more in some way. The reason this is in this build and the reason there's room for it and how I formud is because I tested this with 2 corrosive shards, and let me tell you, don't do it. That build sucks. It is awful and does not apply like enough toxin to corrosive to actually get armor off enemies in this century. So don't bother trying that build, but it is technically very, very slightly better than Prime Continuity, but it's not worth another Forma if it's going to be the difference there for you. And also, it's probably not worth leveling Archon Continuity either, as that's quite an expensive endeavor. Archon Stretch, on the other hand, while a much, much more expensive mod, basically double the price in terms of installing it, this effect is considerably more helpful. This is just abilities that deal electricity damage will restore 2 energy a second over 5 seconds. So you're going to get 20 energy, or rather 10 energy, every time that your abilities proc electricity, and this will refresh. Your 3 will put electricity on basically any enemy in its AoE all the time, constantly, so this is basically a constant 2 energy per second, which is really good. Having Stretch plus almost Energy Nexus turns out is very powerful, but it's not going to be a make or break for this build at all. If you just want to throw regular Stretch in here, you are more than welcome to do that, and it's going to work totally fine, and you're going to save a Forma on it. But if you happen to have Archon Stretch, then good. Then I mean, throw it in there if you want to. If you really like CITRINE, it's definitely a big bonus on her, and will probably help during like deep Archimedias and stuff where there's like more energy restrictions and problems there. A thing that is worth noting is while Archon Flow does work, kind of, realistically it's never going to proc. I would never even bother leveling this. Even for Warframes like Frost, this is like not worthwhile realistically. So don't bother with Archon Flow. And Archon Vitality, which you can also technically proc, just kind of doesn't make the build because the plus health is totally unnecessary in the face of Arcane Blessing. So while you can use this, the extra damage you're going to get on your 3 from it just isn't really worthwhile. And I would say just to skip it and not try and fit it into the build, although I did spend some time doing that. But yeah, that's what's up with the Archon mods. And also, obviously, Archon Intensify doesn't even work on Citrine, so don't bother with those. But for these two, they work, and Archon Stretch is the one that has value. So with that, the build basically is I can rip all of the armor off enemies. I can provide a large status buff with Prismatic Gem, which got its buffs and is now a much more reasonable, like, good ability and is like a team buff. Your 2 obviously is giving you and your whole squad usually 90% damage reduction, which is excellent. Your 1 generates a ton of health and energy orbs, and you're constantly regenerating health all the time with your passive. So Citrine's very good is really the over-under on this. Like, that's really, like, the long and the short of it. I will say for this test, I wanted to use some kind of, like, slightly lower quality weapons to show off just, like, how big the armor removal is. Also, because I just realized I didn't, like, say the reasoning why Pillage is so much better between that and Crystallize, is if we look at Crystallize, this is a 300% critical chance buff, so it basically lets you crit like crazy. With that, that buff doesn't even come close to rivaling the damage increase that you will get by removing enemies' armor. The damage increase you get by removing enemies' armor is often like 100 times damage, like just insane amounts more damage than what you were doing before. And 300% crit is cute, and the numbers are red, but it doesn't compare at all in terms of actual damage dealt to enemies, unless they are health-only enemies, which the Murmur are for some part of them. But again, it's not really going to like matter or come up, and those enemies, because they are health-only, or the ones that are health-only anyway, also pretty much just die to weapons fire. For that, though, I'm using a couple of weaker things. Obviously, it is still the Boltor Prime Incarnate, but that's on kind of like the lower end of the Incarnans. And then I'm also running the Icarius Prime, which are just like a good secondary that we recently got with the Gauss PA that I actually like quite a bit on Citrine. And then I just have like the Nekana Prime on here, which I probably won't use very much, but like using melee weapons on her, especially ones that can proc slash a lot or are mainly slash and have decent status, is definitely worthwhile, and I wanted to point that out. In terms of our Sentinels, I am running Diriga. This will just like give me some free energy casts, free ability casts, and then we also get the crit damage modifier, which is nice. Manifold Bond for reducing the cooldowns on it. It's going to be zapping enemies all the time, and because of the Volklock build that we have going on this is electricity, radiation, and viral pretty much just happening in my AoE all the time. And for anyone that wants the build on the Volklock, it's not very high requirements. But yeah, that's what's going on with companions and things. And, you know, being Citrine, turns out it's very nice. These enemies really don't stand much of a chance at all, as long as you have, like, your 2 on. Throwing out this here. I mean, even with just, like, the basic armor strip, these enemies, even with, like, the Bolt Ore being what I'm using, the extra status, plus, like, even the first level armor strip without even building up, is more than enough to, like, very easily take these enemies down. They don't like it. Also, I believe this enemy is up here. But yeah, being in the AoE, the extra status applied from this, and just being able to like mow down enemies very, very quickly, get all of our buffs, generate a bunch of energy, get a bunch of damage reduction. It's really just the whole hog. Like, you're throwing out your 1 all the time to generate a bunch of energy orbs, and health orbs for that matter. You're hitting your 4 whenever enemies look like they wouldn't die instantaneously. You're getting a bunch of shields off that, which only makes you more survivable between your 2 and adaptation. Yeah, and it's just generally good. At low levels, your 1 on this build has enough range to just simply kill enemies that you're looking at. It works a lot like Dante's Dark Verse, for those of you that have been using that, except for you get energy and health orbs, of course. And that's pretty much what Citrine is up to. She is like a semi-weapons platform, like debuffer, team support, Warframe, and she's excellent. So yeah, let's jump into Steel Path and kill everyone. Shoot a Bolt Ore a lot and have crystals happen. Okay. Jumping into Tav. But yeah, I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed that it's like not a recrystallized build, which is why I did want to show that build off. But you know, it's just better to remove armor. Not to mention that Pillage can also remove shields. Like, it's just a considerably stronger effect, turns out. little bit of energy generated. Start with the Icarius. They're fun. Icarius also really like her 3. That energy generated down there. 250 energy and 600 and 700 health. We already are at 800 health. See the crystal giving us the buff there. The Icarius is actually one of the weapons that really likes the big status buff that you get from her crystal. You see, enemies at this level, like, just with her crystal buff, it's like, you know, even if you're not using Incarnins, enemies don't like this. And they're not fans of weapons that have, like, tons and tons of status, especially if they are heat or slash based. Throw our 2 back on. Get some of the extra shields that we probably don't even need. Move our 3 into here because we have plenty of energy just to kind of move it to wherever we happen to be hanging out. And then anytime enemies get like a little frisky, just give them the old I pressed pillage. Yeah, you can see I have over 3,000 combined shields and health. The 2 potential 90% damage reductions on top of that means that it's like very, very difficult to die. Like enemies even like dealing damage to me is not much of a problem. And it remains not much of a problem for like a large majority of the time. The one place where you will always miss crystallize on CITRINE is acolytes because it hyper trivializes them. But it's really overall, I think, not worth keeping compared to the ability to get a big armor strip, especially on large groups and stuff like that, and just like use, you know, you get a larger pool of weapons. They're going to make it to much higher levels if you are on an armor strip as opposed to crystallize. Enemies being armorless does make it harder to charge my Incarnin, so there's that. Does that count as a downside? For me personally, I think the answer is no. And you can see, like, with this status buff, it's actually pretty interesting that you can kind of see some stuff of, like, oh, if the Boltor Incarnin actually had, like, a little bit more status than it does with, like, the buff choices that are on it right now, it would actually be, like, really good. Like, it would be, like, a very solid weapon suddenly, as opposed to, like, just a bit underwhelming. And part of that is also that I do have, like, the Galvanized Statuses mod on this, so that is, of course, making a big difference. You can see just, like, our 3 hanging out and, like, having access to pillage. Like, we're killing, like, enough Xmas and stuff that, like, we honestly don't have to cast our 1 that much. But we can, and you can see how good that is at killing enemies whenever our 3 is out and enemies don't have armor. Because you can actually get away pretty easily with this. Like, even at this level, like, your 1 can just, like, kill these enemies with, like, your 3's back up. Oh, our 3 ran out. You can see that there. Like, you can just kind of, like, laugh and, like, laser them down. It works. It's not super efficient. It's not nearly as efficient as just, like, using a gun. But it is funny, and at lower levels, it shreds. At lower level enemies they're not a fan. Don't even have my 2 on. These enemies just can't handle it. Yeah, CITRINE, what a fantastic Warframe CITRINE is. Like, I wish her farm was a little shorter, but, like, other than that, what a great Warframe. Throw our 3 back out here. Get this orb off me. Shoot Malice real quick. There he goes. He doesn't like having a bunch of statuses on him. It's weird. Bunch of statuses plus the mod that makes it so that you do more damage when there's more statuses on an enemy. That couldn't be good. No way. It is also worth noting that mod... I think I mention this every single time this bug comes up, but it's very frustrating that it's still in the game, so I'm going to continue to mention it. All Incarnins on, like, galvanized shot type effects, the condition overload effects on guns, actually all of the melees as well, they're all bugged so that extra base damage is not affected. Thankfully for the Boltor, it doesn't get a lot of base damage from its evolutions, which is kind of funny to say because, you know, of course it would want more if things were working appropriately. But it's in a position where it is affected much less by that bug than it would otherwise be. Also, we're at about 5 minutes, 520 kills. And, like, honestly, I've been taking things pretty casually. Like, as I said, I brought weapons that are, like, a bit on the worse end just to show the power of, like, what buffs you're getting from CITRINE. And also, keep in mind, it's worth noting, her 3 buffs are for everyone in the AoE. So, like, this thing will be helping everyone on your team if you're, like, on a defense mission or something like that, and people are standing, you know, relatively close to it, because it is, like a 30-meter radius. That is going to help very significantly with, like, your teammates' damage output. So if you're concerned about, like, you know, your teammates maybe not having the best builds, it'll give them a little push sometimes that will make them much better. People, like, you know, if someone's bringing the Boltor Prime with a suboptimal build, turns out 100% plus more status will do pretty well for them. So you can help them out that way, and of course the survivability you get from CITRINE. Give everybody 90% DR. It's also not going to hurt. I mean, even on top, I mean, if they need any more help, like, you're removing all of the shields, or rather all of the armor from all of the enemies, and if your teammates aren't doing stuff at that point, I don't think you need their help. Like, you're not going to get their help if you're not getting it at that point. Like, you're basically doing the entire mission for them once you're past that threshold. But from what I have gathered from the Twitch streams, that seems to be usually the case anyway. But you know, that's what's going on. If you want your team to feel like they can do something, you can give them every conceivable buff that they won't immediately notice, and make all the enemies feel like they're level 30 again, and you know, just kind of work with it. And also, you'll be totally invincible, basically. So, like this build, even when CITRINE comes up in circuit, it's like, oh yeah, what weapons did I get? It doesn't really matter. Like, as long as I got, like, not the hottest garbage, it doesn't really matter. I got something workable because I'm CITRINE and I have a full armor strip and so on and so forth. Like, if you can't make the gun work with CITRINE, it means the gun isn't worth putting mods in. Like, that's like really effectively what it just actually means. The gun was not worth installing a mod into if you did, because it wasn't going to change. And also the benefit here, like, with these enemies are, like, you know, 135 steel path. So, like, just using your 1, not the worst thing in the world. Like, armor stripped enemies, like, just, like, throwing your 1 out at them, like, it's really not bad. Obviously, your 3 kind of needs to be around, but it's certainly not the worst thing in the world. If you really want to go crazy with it, you can run the non-overextended version of this build if you don't mind sacrificing the range, because I know some people don't feel like they need this much range just anyway. And if you go the route of not taking that range, one of the things that you can do is swap out an Augment with Aegis, and then you are, like, truly invincible on this build. Like, if you're dying, it's going to be pretty rare. Like, you have to be... Those digits... There's got to be at least 4 of them on the enemy level. And that first number is probably not a 1, 2, or a 3 either. Or you're not shooting the enemies. That could do it too. If you're just not fighting back, maybe they'll get you. But yeah, it's really... I really... You know, CITRINE is a Warframe I don't play a whole lot. But I just really enjoy her every time I do play her. Just throwing her crystals out, like, getting her buffs down and stuff. Like, I was not a big fan of her 3 at launch, but it received some buffs that have made it considerably, like, improved. What a good Warframe. Like, just doing good stuff. She's a very do whatever you want Warframe too. Like, if you want to, like, mess around with melee, as long as you have PSF, of course, for that. You can just, like, do melee stuff. Like, I just swap to the Nakana right now, and it's like, it's not like it's gonna be a problem. Nakana with extra status is crazy, and I get, like, the super high my status for my 3 and everything like that, plus, like, the extra. If you were using, like, Condition Overload, you get 4 statuses right away. for your melee weapon from your 3 being out, and that's great. I mean, hey, for the sake of argument, let's just like hit Torment with this whenever it comes in. Whoop. There you go. Goodbye. Like, you can just do this as CITRINE. She can just like swap up and just do whatever, very freeform style, very just like hanging out, and you know, not much to be said. We're at 891 kills, but you know, I've been kind of goofing off. And also this is a support Warframe. So, you know, it's the thing that she doesn't look it, but she gives 90% damage reduction in like a 50-meter area with her 2. Her 3 is above. With Pillage, she's even more of a support, stripping giant AoEs of armor and like, you know, purging statuses off enemies or off allies rather. What a good Warframe. Like, it's unfortunate that Recrystallized didn't live up to the leak hype. But you know, I think it's pretty clear that it didn't exactly need to. That build is also still really good because CITRINE is a hyper flexible Warframe that's super strong. So, you know, it is what it is. Recrystallized wasn't as good as I hoped, and this is still fantastic. So, you know, not a ton to complain about, really. Really could have taken it or left it. New CITRINE build, it's excellent. Go do crystal things. Go Jamussy. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. And also, of course, thanks as usual to the patrons for supporting the channel, especially the $10 patrons: Alex Parnham, Andrew, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Canolathra, Dylan Dworsky, Ethrain, Havon, James Harstthorne, JC4 Science, John Lobdell, Joshua Adams, Luzanth, Malakix Williams, Mikokel, Minty Ginja, Michta, Nerve, Moxidate, Ruby, Sanyu, Skur, Sharp247, Camarilla Wastelander, The Coupon of Death, Tomeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars, Waldad, and Sarah Fear. And of course, thank you to all of the $5 patrons as well. Your support is extremely appreciated. But yeah, we're about to get the Dante update. Should be an excellent time. Expect tons of videos to be coming about all the changes and new stuff that we're getting in that update, and should be excellent. And then the tier list will hopefully shortly follow.